Hello, I'm going to get this started with trying to record my screencast. I created a PowerPoint with the questions, and I'll have the audio record while I narrate the answers to the questions that you had for homework assignment and kind of go with a discussion there. Unfortunately, I'm doing this because I'm preparing for no class co-op and still cloudy, stormy skies, and I have satellite internet, which doesn't work for cloudy skies. So hopefully I'll be able to post this without any difficulties tomorrow in time for class, but if not, it will post shortly after, whenever the skies clear up. So I want to get started with lesson 16. And that chapter was titled The War Begins. The first question I assigned for you was, who gave the speech that ended, "Give me liberty or give me death"? And that is Patrick Henry. So just to give you a little background, Patrick Henry lived in the Virginia colony, and he gave this speech to the Virginia Burgesses, which was a government body in the colony at the time. He gave his speech, which I don't think is in your lesson. It's in the American Voices book. This speech was a speech in favor of the United States breaking away from Great Britain and in favor of the Patriot movement. The next question, whom did the Second Continental Congress appoint as commander of the Continental Army? That, of course, is George Washington. The next question is, which side won the Battle of Breed's Hill, also known as Bunker Hill? I think you'll most likely hear Bunker Hill in later history, but the winner was the British, and it was at a high cost. They lost a lot of men in that battle. So the Declaration of Independence is chapter 17. The first question I assigned was, who wrote Common Sense? And that is Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, a pamphlet that was a patriot, I guess you could say, propaganda. It was in favor of American independence. Who was the principal writer of the Declaration of Independence? And that, of course, is Thomas Jefferson. What happened in Congress on July 4th, 1776? And that is when Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. The next question, the grievances listed in the Declaration of Independence were directed against what part of the British government? And that is the King. Lesson 18, the Revolutionary War. What was the turning point of the war and why? So the turning point of the war is at the Battle of Saratoga. It was a surrender of the British forces there. It was a victory for the United States, and it brought France into the war. I know we talked last week about France lost a great deal through the French and Indian War, so therefore they kind of sided with the Americans when it was time for the Americans to have a revolution against the British. What was the turning point of the war in the South? And that is Kings Mountain, the Battle of Kings Mountain. Kings Mountain is in the northern of South Carolina. I think they call it the upcountry. It's right on the North Carolina South Carolina state line. What factors in the overall prosecution of the war worked against the British? So some of the factors the book has listed is poor military leaders. They were fighting far from home. They had supply line problems with getting supplies like food and ammunition to the British soldiers. And the book also lists the failure of the British diplomacy with the American colonies. And I would say, yes, that is a factor, but that was more of a factor of a cause leading to the American Revolution. but I think it was a factor that actually helped the Americans. So that is the next question, which what factors helped the Americans? And that would be Washington's leadership was far superior than the British military leaders. The American soldiers fought better. They were stronger. They were hardworking. They were determined. These were colonists. These were Americans that had come over, and they built their own homes. They tilled their own fields. They were strong, and they were hardy people. They were also had the home field advantage. They knew the terrain. They knew the territory. They knew the climate. They were familiar with everything that around them and their surroundings. They also had assistance from the French government. France aided the Americans in the Revolution. So lesson 19, society and government after the Revolution. So I have 2 slides for this because we had so many questions. But the first one was, how was the American Revolution a civil war? The Civil War, the way it was a civil war is because it pitted British citizen against British citizen. The American colonists were British citizens, and a lot of them actually remained loyal to Britain. And many of those eventually left the United States either during or after the Revolution. A lot of them went to Canada, and some of them even went back to Great Britain. So what elements of American life were stable and what was disrupted during the war? So the government and society were relatively stable. So that we know that each colony had a governing body. During the colonial time, it was dictated by what the king said, but there was already a governing body in place. So when the head of the power shifted from British to colonial, there was already a body there already able to make in laws and govern the people. What was disrupted was the economy. So before the Revolution, the colonists and Britain, it was one economy. There wasn't a separate economy. Everything that the colonists had went filtered through Great Britain and back. So once that connection was broken or severed, the colonists were left with having to start from nothing, having to start from the very beginning again. How was Western settlement affected by the outcome of the War for Independence? Well, it was very much encouraged by the Americans. We talked last week about the Great Britain discouraged and would not allow any settlement past the Appalachian Mountains. And the colonists didn't like that because they were running out of land. So when American won the Revolution, and they actually encouraged more Western settlement. Who led the thousands of settlers through the Cumberland Gap? And that is Daniel Boone. What economic opportunities did America offer that Great Britain did not? So America offered more opportunity for land ownership. They also could build wealth. They needed skilled craftsmen. So there was more work opportunities beyond just being a servant or indentured servants like was before under the British government. So now regular colonists could own land, buy land, and work for themselves. What did many state constitutions written in the 1780s provide? Many of them provided a Bill of Rights. What was the first governing document of the United States? The first governing document of the United States was the Articles of Confederation. What was a major issue that delayed the ratification of this document by the states? And that was the disposition of Western land. So they were arguing over how and what land in the Western settlements to divide that up, and who got it and how they got it. This is lesson 20. It's our Bible study. Always the 5th lesson of the unit is more of a Bible study. But I included a couple questions because you might see these later on the Bible exam, so I wanted you to be familiar with them. And actually, this first one may not have been in part of your homework assignment. I highlighted it and scribbled it out, so I'm not sure if I included it, so I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer. How does the eye of faith see the world's history of wars and the rise and fall of nations is as the work of God? Now, this next question I know I gave to you was who causes the rise and fall of nations, and that is God. You probably didn't need to know that in a PowerPoint or in a discussion. You probably know that without reading the book, but just wanted to make sure that you did know that. Another thing that I assigned in your homework that was not necessarily a question, but I wanted you to make sure that you knew, and this goes back a couple of slides to lesson 18. I think I can get us there. In lesson 18 talks about and what I wanted you to make sure you knew was Trenton, New Jersey was a battle in Trenton, New Jersey, and it was an American win. This may be more familiar when you think about George Washington and hearing how he crossed the Delaware. This is that battle. So on Christmas night, 1776, George Washington led men across the icy Delaware and made a surprise attack on 1,500 Hessians at Trenton, which is in Trenton, New Jersey, who were not expecting any military activity that night. Obviously, it was a win for Americans because it was a surprise attack. Now, the Hessians, if you aren't familiar with, were German mercenaries. They were hired soldiers from Germany, so they were all fighting for the British, but they had no real allegiance to the British. They were just hired to come in and do a job, and the Washington led American militia over the Delaware, and I'm sure you've heard about George Washington crossing the Delaware, and this is it. So he crossed the Delaware. The battle in Trenton, New Jersey was an American victory. So let me get back to the last slide. And last slide I have for you is at the end for you to take your Unit 4 quiz. If you have any questions or concerns, please email me or text me. You should all have my number. If you don't, my email is on the class page, so there should be a way to email me through that. I hope to get this published some way or somehow. Right now my internet's not working, so I've tried to publish before, and on a little practice run it wasn't very successful. So I'm recording this and hopefully be able to publish it. If not, I'll figure something else out. You have a good day, and hopefully you're staying safe and out of this weather.